the two things that I've been watching. Number one is what the Saudis are doing with the oil sales. Traditionally, they've always been in dollars. Now they're starting to do a few individual cargoes, no long-term contracts, nothing like that, just individual cargoes in primarily yuan. And the reason isn't for finance. The reason is for security. The Saudis have always relied upon the United States as their sole security guarantor because militarily they are absolutely incompetent. So they park cargoes of crude oil off Louisiana just waiting for an order so that the Americans always think of them as the reliable supplier, and in exchange the United States makes sure they remain independent. The shale revolution has removed a lot of that from our point of view. We're really not interested in those spare cargoes now. And during the Cold War, we needed that oil to fuel the global alliance to contain the Soviets. Well, we don't care about that very much anymore either. In fact, the number one consumer of Middle Eastern crude is now China, which is a competitor. So the very argument that the United States cares about this at all is kind of limited. And so it means that the Saudis, who can't fight, won't fight, need someone else to watch their back, and there just aren't a lot of candidates. It has to be a country with a navy that allows them to deploy to the region, and it has to be a country that can actually put boots on the ground in the Persian Gulf to fight off Iran if the issue comes up. There are only 4 countries aside from the United States, well, 5, that theoretically could do that. You've got Britain, France, Turkey, Japan, and China. What the Saudis are doing are keeping their options open. So they do the odd cargo in yuan to make the Chinese be more interested. And they're doing the same thing in China today that they did in the United States in the 70s. They're buying up refineries in China and retooling them to specifically run Saudi crude in order to build a dependence. It's not a stupid plan, but it's not a whole-scale overhaul of what they're doing with currency policy. Keep in mind that the Chinese yuan is not convertible. And if you're a country like Saudi who has these huge flows of capital coming in, you want to put them into a deep liquid market. And that's still only the US dollar. So we're talking about low single digits of individual oil shipments being redenominated. It's not nothing, but it's not that much. The other issue is what the consuming countries are doing. Countries that say they don't like the US dollar or don't like the United States system for whatever reason. And everyone likes to go to the BRICS and talk about a BRICS currency. Well, sorry folks, but at the Johannesburg summit last year, the Indians, the South Africans, and the Chinese all in their opening statements said that they have no interest in a non-U.S. dollar denominated system. They don't want a BRICS currency, and will people please stop asking them about it? This is something that's going on in the American subconscious. This is not something that has any real traction globally. In fact, the only country in the wider world who specifically wants something else is Russia, and they just want everyone to use the ruble, which is not going to happen. Let me give you what to watch for if this is going to turn. Globally, demographics are shifting. The birth rate globally has been too low for too long, and it's starting to challenge the economic models that underpin capitalist economies. Capitalist economies are ultimately about a balance between investment and consumption. And consumption is not just what drives domestic economic activity, but what drives international trade. But when the birth rate is too low for too long, consumption starts to falter. And that's where we are in China, in Japan, in Korea, in Taiwan, in Thailand, in Germany, in Italy, and on and on and on and on and on. And so in those countries, the rules of the game, our understanding of the interrelation between inflation and consumption and production and taxes are all unraveling, and we're losing the capacity to understand what's going on under the hood with the economy. At the moment, that's not happening in the United States. Our birth rate has been higher than everyone's for a while. It's been higher than China's now for almost 40 years. And consumption is still the single biggest factor driving economic activity in the United States. So for us, the old rules for the moment hold and probably will for a few more decades. And so when I look at the United States, I look at consumption, I look at retail sales, I look at first-time unemployment claims, I look at employment in general. And the normal things that have driven the U.S. economy, consumption, credit, investment, and employment levels all look green. I understand why there's some concerns, and I understand why in some subsectors what I just said is not true. But overall, it looks okay. The question on the jobs front and on the consumption front. And those are the two single most important things in the U.S. system. Now, if we have delinquencies rise on, say, mortgages, then you start getting into your traditional concerns about a financial tinged recession. And we have seen delinquencies come up, but we are well below the 50-year average, and we're nowhere near where we've been at the kickoff point for every recession to this point. So again, for the moment, things look pretty good. My concern is that federal spending has increased year on year to a level that is now starting to challenge consumption as the primary driver. Now, this only happened for 1 year so far. If that were to happen for several years, the concern wouldn't necessarily be recession per se, but that the warning lights that we would normally look at suddenly don't mean as much, because that's where we are in Germany and Italy and Japan and the rest. Just because the economy on the whole is doing well doesn't mean it's doing well for everyone. Inequality is an issue in this country. There's no way you sugarcoat that. And people who are trying to get into the system, the housing issue is pretty easy to explain. We stopped building for a few months during COVID, and everyone was shell-shocked, so new construction just slowed down, and we now probably have a shortage of 4 million homes. You combine that with the most dynamic internal migration we've seen in the country in 40 years as people move to places where there are more jobs, and there's housing shortages in the high growth locations. Now, believe it or not, this is a good problem because it's ultimately based on an increase in supply and demand throughout the broader economy. But if you happen to be the low man on the totem pole during that transition, it's not a pleasant experience. There's not going to be another currency, so the United States has the opportunity to monetize. As a fiscal conservative, it makes me grate my teeth saying that, but it provides us with a lot more flexibility than anyone else would have, and we will use it. Number two, the reason why the debt's going to get bigger. The baby boomers, who are about half retired now, are going from the largest tax-paying class in American history to the largest tax-taking class in American history. And that imbalance, we're only at the beginning of that process. That will last another 15 years until the majority of the baby boomers are gone. So the deficits we have now are nothing compared to what we're going to have in 5-10 years. Third, the politics of it. We're going through a political reshuffling. What defines the Republican Party is already shattered, and what it defines the Democratic Party is in the process of breaking. So when we're in a late party structure like this, you get personalities that dominate the structures rather than ideas or movements. And you get candidates like Biden, like Trump, who have defined populism as their ticket to power. And both of them plan to significantly expand spending for any number of reasons moving forward. And because the baby boomers are soon to be a voting but not income generating class, that is the target of these policies. And it will be popular with them. And if you're a Gen X or younger, you're left with the bill. So whatever you think is going on with the debt, I can guarantee you it's worse. But we also have a lot more flexibility, but because of internationalization of the US dollar. As long as the dollar is the reserve currency, that allows us at least 100% of GDP buffer in our debt. I mean, always look at Japan for what is possible. Here's a country that has a combined debt with pension arrears of almost 500% of GDP right now, and they're still there. We're only at about 100%. Every couple of years, some academic asshat in China starts talking about how if we just dumped $3 trillion in treasuries on the market, we could end the US dollar system. And there's always some guy at the US Federal Reserve, I think he's out of St. Louis, who just issues the same report. He's like, I don't know if you knew this, but if you were to dump a lot of treasuries onto the market at the same time, they might go down to 50, maybe even 30 cents on the dollar. But don't know if you knew this, the US Federal Reserve controls the US money supply. And it's digital now. So we could go and expand the money supply by exactly the number that you dumped and retire $3 trillion of debt for less than $1 trillion. Please do that. This is not a risk. If anything, this is an opportunity. Let's look at the side you want to hear, and then we'll talk about the side you don't want to hear. The side you want to hear. Yeah, that'd be a problem. We'd actually have to live within our means. We'd have to cut our primary deficit by at least 4% of GDP. That is roughly equivalent to the entirety of what we spend on Medicare and Medicaid. We could not do that without feeling some pain. Now, it wouldn't be a Greek-style pain. It wouldn't be like a British 1980s style pain. It wouldn't be an Argentine or a Turk style pain. It wouldn't be a cultural revolution pain, but we'd have to tighten our budget, and it would probably be like a 1990, 1991 degree pain. We'd feel it, absolutely. What's the global currency now? Because it matters. There is no country out there that has the fiscal depth or the liquidity necessary. There's no coalition of countries to replace the US dollar. So if we just move away from the concept of the global store of value, you are talking economic collapse and something far worse than the Great Depression for pretty much everyone in Northeast Asia and Western Europe. Not to mention the developing world, where debt crises would go through the roof. And then all of a sudden, people are clamoring for the one currency that has any degree of depth or liquidity. And all of a sudden, the world has bailed out the US dollar.